I need some time. It's not another game. Don't wanna play another game.
This fly is a deadly bass fly. And one thing I'll say, I would rather fish for trout any day of the year during inclement weather than smallmouth bass. They can be, I mean, a trout will continue to feed even on a big barometric pressure drop or a big temperature change. Their feeding will slow until they kind of get acclimatized, if you will. But bass will shut down and stop feeding, sometimes for days on end. And one of the advantages we have when we're in the drift boat is we get to often watch their behavior, and I know that especially on a river like the Saugeen, which gets a fair amount of pressure, even the Middle Grand over the past couple of years used to be very, very reliable. Like, you could go down there. I've had more guys through that stretch of river that have said, I've never caught so many fish in my life. I'm talking 40 to 60 fish days from, and not all big fish, but fish from 6 inches to the odd 18-inch fish.
Are you talking bass now?
Bass, yeah. The Saugeen, when I first started guiding on it almost 20 years ago, it was pretty reliable too. I think the big thing, I don't think it's so much the angling pressure as much as the recreational boat traffic on those two rivers. The Grand Adventures, I think it's Grand Adventures, is the one in Paris. He puts 10,000 boats through there a year. That's hard to believe, but we got that right from the GRCA, because we were complaining about the premiums that we had to pay on our insurance for the GRCA, and he was paying the same thing, but using it. If on a good year I might guide down there a dozen times, he's putting 10,000 trips through there a year. So I think both there on the Saugeen, I think the fish have become really nocturnal. I think that they shut down during the day, because I know when I start in the afternoons and fish into the evening, usually around supper time they start to turn on again, and that's of course when the majority of the traffic is off the rivers and the fish are getting hungry. But saying that, they will during a big temperature drop, they will shut down feeding. We'll come across fish just sort of out in the flats sunning, and again, being in the boat and having a bit of a bird's eye view, we're watching the fish, and they're not foraging. They're just hanging out. If I've got a guy on board that can cast reasonably well, and I say, you got to lead that fish by 6 or 8 feet, and they do, and everything's perfect, and you drop a fly, the fish may come over to it, but he just swims off and settles back in. When they're aggressive, when they're really on, they'll come over to it and eat it. So they're not easy to catch, especially during cold fronts. This fly that Steve and Ian sort of popularized, I guess, is a very animated pattern, but it's also very simple to tie. In this case, I'm using squirrel zonker rather than rabbit. One of these I tied with rabbit, and one I've tied with squirrel. On the smaller hooks, I prefer to go with the squirrel. So it's as simple as this. We're going to tie in the squirrel zonker from the rear, and just a little bit shorter than that. And as you guys probably know, rabbit zonker or squirrel zonker is it provides a lot of movement in the when it gets wet, and really sort of pulsates and undulates in the water. So it's a fly that you can sort of leave alone, just cast it and let it settle in, and then with small twitches you really get that stuff moving. So there's our tail. Steve calls this the full motion hex, but it could certainly represent a brown drake as well. They're very similar. Both a burrowing nymph, and although they're not in the water all the time, I think during the right times of the year the fish get used to seeing them, and it's just a good buggy fly. So now I'm going to take some. This is Hungarian partridge, and I'm just going to prepare that. I'm going to tie it in by the tip, so I'm going to fold the barbs back and give myself a point to start tying it in. And like I always say when I'm tying in hackles, whether I'm tying them in from the tips or from the stem, I'm going to tie it in loosely, and then I'm going to pull it back so I don't capture any of the hackle under the thread. So I give myself a point that I can sort of manipulate it if I have to. Ian and I were talking about this fly, and I told him, I said, I don't think I've ever caught a trout on it. I fished it for trout. I don't think I've ever caught a trout on it, but it is an exceptional bass fly. So now you can see how much of that quill I've got exposed. Now I can get it going in the right direction, and I'm just gonna wet my fingers a little bit and just sort of palmer it back. We're gonna tie it in edge to edge and just get those hackles going in the right direction. Pull any strays that get captured away. And what this is meant to do, this hackle is meant to represent the gills or along the flanks of the natural, the real fly. And it's there's two collars on it. There's this rear one and then one in the front. Secure that. And I don't mind running that quill up there just to build up a little bit of mass on the body. I'll get rid of that. Steve uses I think a pearl mylar rib. I don't think it makes a big difference unless you want something with UV. I'm just because of the colors that I'm using, I'm just putting this brass rib in. Brass colored. It's just a garden variety tinsel, if you will. Yeah, we'll secure that. These nymphs are fairly robust. They're a big, aggressive nymph, so I'm going to dub the body fairly heavy. Normally when I'm tying trout flies, you guys know from the past that I always talk about just coloring the thread. I'm going to put this on fairly thick because it is a big fly. Just break that up a little bit. So you guys have seen me dubbing in the past where I'm taking just little wisps and putting it on like that. This is, I don't mind this being a little bigger, as long as you don't end up with any big lumps in it, because we all know that the better your fly looks, the more fish it catches. You know, that's a fact, isn't it? Isn't it, Wojciech?
I agree with you. Totally agree.
So this is Hare's Ear Plus, or Hairline Plus, the stuff with the, if you look at this, it's
got the guard hairs.
it's got a little bit of Antron blended in with it. So I'm going to take that up again, fairly heavy. If you want to get a little bit of a taper in there, nothing wrong with that. And add just a titch more.
See, you've oiled your bobbin.
I have oiled my bobbin, although I did just hear it. This is the squeaky one too. I think I put earwax on it or something the last time I was using it.
Should have taken the hair out of it.
All right, so now I'm gonna bring this rib back in the opposite direction, just to give a little bit of security. And also, by taking it in the opposite direction, it's not gonna drop into the gaps in the dubbing as much, so it's just gonna be a little bit more visible. And when I can, I try and get just a slightly larger hackle for the front collar, but this Hungarian partridge is getting pretty picked over. And I do want the front collar to be just slightly heavier than the rear one. And again, like I always say, it has far less to do with the effectiveness of the fly and more to do with the appearance. I'm pretty picky when it comes to that kind of thing, but I'm going to tie it in again by the tips. A couple of soft turns, and then again just pull that back. So I've got a good quarter or half turn before I start before I start wrapping the hackle. I'm not even going to worry about those. I could cut them off, but they're gonna fall into place. Hackle pliers on here. And again, I'm just kind of folding these back to get them started in the right direction, so that hopefully when it starts to wrap around the hook, you won't have any errant pieces going awry. Speaking of rye, I could use a drink.
That's not a good sign.
It's not a bad sign.
It's not midday yet. You're not down on the beach.
Somewhere.
Down south.
So again, these hackles, if you look at a natural, one of those big burrowing nymphs, the brown drakes, green drakes, hexagenias, they're really quite gangly and they have a lot of pieces to them, and those gills are that run along the flanks, they move a lot. So that's the idea here, is to
Confuse the fish.
get that look. And I always talk about triggers on flies, and I think that the tail and the hackles here are the real triggers. I didn't bring any black dubbing over, so I'm just going to use this. I think Steve uses a peacock herl here. I usually just dub mine, but it's just another little collar, just a contrast, or a contrasting color. And this won't be terribly heavy, just a couple of wraps.
Steve used to have the complete kit, didn't he, for tying these? Did you?
They may have sold them there. It's a very popular fly. I know that Ken stocks up on them every year. He's always got a pile of these and his crayfish, and I don't know if I would say that those two patterns are the flies that he fishes and has the most success with. But you know, so often when we're talking about bass flies, we're thinking big stuff, whether they're poppers or big woolies. Just like anything, any predatory fish, these fish often don't necessarily want that, and sometimes the difference is going with these. Now I'll fish these on again when the fish are starting to or are being finicky. I'll go down to a 3X fluorocarbon tippet, and sometimes I'll put a piece of split shot 18 or 20 inches up on it, just to get it down a little quicker. Also to provide a little bit of movement when it's in the water, and those short strips, that lead weight will take it down and make it dodge. Other times I'll just fish it on a long leader, and without any weight, and just let the weight of the fly take it down. And if you're in a situation where you can see the fish and spot the fly, then you can see how the fish are reacting to it. But it's a very good, as I said, these are finesse flies, and it's just a very buggy but very effective finesse fly. So you see how simple that is? Three or four parts, and that's it.